All right, I want to thank Southpaw Autoworks for his excellent series on video series on the 4L60E, the most common transmission in the US in auto engines. And I am getting a rebuilt 4L60E transmission to pick up today, and it's one of the most complicated pieces of engineering in the world. And the Southpaw Autoworks has made a series of stunning videos. They're eloquent. They use animation, and he was born with just his left hand fully intact, and then he has his right hand is half of his arm. So his motto is, if I can train to do this, then you can do it with two hands, But I don't know. It's just super. The video series is by far the best on YouTube on explaining the 4L60E. And I've been researching this the past few days, as since I haven't had my dad's car. This is my dad's. It's a truck. It's an SUV. And what happens is the 3 to 4 clutch pack goes out on the 4L60E, and mine went out at 270,000 miles, and the transmission's rated to 250,000 to 300,000 miles. So it served its purpose. And the main reason the 3 to 4 clutch pack goes out is because of centrifugal cavitation, which is kind of fascinating. Essentially, if you drive the engine at high RPMs, like 5,000 RPMs and above, then it spins the input shaft so fast on the transmission pump, that it causes centrifuge, which evacuates the transmission oil at a faster rate than the pump can handle, based on the springs. There's these springs that what's the name of these? I think they're called stretch springs for the pump valve. And then there's an actuator pressure line valve that has these release springs, or boost springs. And so the automatic transmissions, they use hydraulics, and so the valves, they have all these little metal balls in them with springs, and the oil causes pressure in one way, and then the spring causes pressure in the other way, and then the ball is in between them and gets pushed based on the oil or the spring, and releases more oil, or stops releasing oil, and then the oil has to go through the valve body through this very complicated set of channels, and it has to go both horizontally and vertically, so it goes up and out and over and under, and then the pressure is kept constant at about 115 psi through the actuator pressure line valve, and it does that by vibrating back and forth with the spring. But the incoming line pressure can be as high as over 300 psi. But if you're just idling, it's about 55 psi. And then, if you're at a high RPM and then you downshift, then what happens is the check ball doesn't release the oil fast enough from the 3 to 4 clutch pack, and so it stays engaged, and then it doesn't have enough oil in it, and then it gets like dragged along, and it burns out the clutch pack. So there's that's based on the accumulator piston, which has, he didn't really go into the accumulator pistons that much with the release valves in the accumulator pistons, but he did go over the planetary gears with the sun gear and the planetary carrier and the ring gear, and the ring gear has internal teeth to it, and so there's 2 different planetary gear sets, and that's how you have 2 different reverses, which I didn't know. There's 2 different reverses. Then you have overdrive, which would be a less than 1 ratio. So the input shaft is the sun gear for the overdrive because it's the smallest gear, so it's spinning the fastest for every 1 rotation of the engine, of the RPMs. And then you have the reverse shell and the overdrive, or I can't remember the name of it's sort of like a coast thing, but there's a different name for it. It locks you when you're in the manual gears. It uses engine braking instead of coasting. And so the most of the videos on the YouTube are just people doing a takedown and a reassembly of the transmission, and they show them, they're taking out the parts, a teardown as they call it, and they're taking out the parts and then they're putting them back in. But what the Southpaw Autoworks does is he puts tape on the gear, so you can actually see the ratio of the different gears, and when they reverse direction, and how the clutch bands spline with the gears and the teeth of the gears, and then you have the solenoids, which is the electrical control, and there's 5 different solenoids, and those also have valves inside them, but they're electromagnetically activated. That's why they're solenoids. So they're electrically controlled, and the whole The main thing is if when you get a rebuilt transmission, you got to make sure you have a new torque converter, because there can be metal left over from the previously damaged transmission that's being rebuilt. And so I'm getting a rebuilt transmission. And the other thing is they'll try to use stiffer springs to counteract that high RPM cavitation from the centrifuge of the high centrifugal high RPM cavitation of the oil. So if you have a stronger spring in the release valves of the pistons, and also the pump stretch valve, then the stretcher springs, then there's two of those. Like Sonax sells a stiffer spring precisely so your transmission can withstand a higher RPM, like above 5,000, or that's for like, above 5 to over 6,000. So I didn't know any of this, and I had the engine, I think I went above 6,000 once, and I went, above 5,000. It's the main problem is if you're downshifting at high RPMs. Whenever you go into high RPMs. So with this new rebuilt transmission, I'm just gonna make sure I stay under 5,000 RPM and just drive like a grandpa, like a grandpa driving, because the engine I have has a really high level of torque, because it's a inline 6 engine. It's called the Vortex 4200. So basically you achieve like a 90% level of torque at 2,000 RPM, and so you can easily overpower the engine when you increase the torque at 5,000 to 6,000 RPM. And so that's pretty much my summary of the transmission. It's if you get a new transmission from General Motors, then it has a 3-year guarantee. The rebuilt transmission I have that I'm getting is going to have a 1-year warranty. And that means if there's any problem, they'll fix it for free within 1 year. But ideally you don't want any problem, because if there's any problem, then they have to take apart the whole transmission again, and nobody wants to do that. I mean, these things they're just super complicated. Let's see, I watched probably, I don't know, like 24 videos on the RL60E, and there's a transmission shop that's nearby where I brought the car. So I got lucky, because the mechanic said, yeah, we have a transmission that's been rebuilt already, and it was going to go into another same model car that I have, and so we can use it for your car. And I mean, I guess I'm lucky that there's a transmission. There's a shop that's all they do is, they rebuild transmissions and do transmission overhauls and replace transmissions. So I'm getting a rebuilt transmission. And that's why they break down, because you hear it's like, I don't know, I didn't know that they're that vulnerable, but especially when they age, then the springs wear out and they can't handle the pressure from the RPMs, the PSI, from the high RPMs. And so I didn't know that. And basically the whole transmission was failing because I had to drive it for a while it was still, and also I tried to use a transmission fix, and that actually will make it worse in a lot of cases, which it's sort of a last ditch effort to try to make it better, but it can make it worse also. So it's kind of like you can use it, but it's, if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter because it wouldn't have worked anyways. So it's expensive. Like, I could have bought another used car, but it wouldn't have been as good as this current. This for what I need. Also, it was my dad's vehicle, so that's the main reason I'm trying to his memory to keep it going, and it's still, the title is was passed from his name, still in his name. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's been really fascinating to learn about this transmission, and a manual transmission that I grew up driving a manual transmission, and they don't use any hydraulics, so it's just like a totally different setup. It's a lot simpler. You can still burn out the clutch, but and I've never studied a manual transmission, but it's basically just it's like more like a bicycle gear, like a derailleur on a bicycle. All right, so that's pretty much it. There's you could spend your whole life studying this transmission if you wanted to, to be an expert on it. And that's what Southpaw has done. So thanks.